I have a strange fascination with the emergency alert system. This fascination literally made this channel, my first video being about the fan-made creations based on the system, and me finally going through with writing a video essay because of a very strong EAS phase I was in. However, my fascination with this concept mainly lay in these fictional scenarios, how these alerts are conformed and over-dramatized to unrealistic situations. Depending on the scenario, this could result in hilarity or utter despair. Fiction allows the basic formula of these alerts that we see in real life to be completely broken, and creators use this freedom to ensure horror. But beyond that, some tragedies that happen in our world, the real world, are so devastating that this formula was broken in a real emergency broadcast. Hurricane Katrina, amongst the most destructive of natural disasters, held one incredibly notable emergency broadcast, warning New Orleans in a way never seen before, and possibly never to be seen again. Hello my friends, let's dive into the most blunt, harsh, and chilling emergency broadcast that was ever put on the air. Strap in, and let's go. When I mentioned a basic formula being broken through fiction, you may not immediately be sure of what I'm talking about. In America, most EAS broadcasts are activated due to weather alerts by the National Weather Service. When this happens, the alert reads off a bulletin that explains what the event is and how to respond. It follows this strict listing procedure and is typically only slightly changed for more severe circumstances. That's effectively all these EASs are, just a robotic voice leading a bulletin by the NWS.
Tornado emergency for East Limestone and Northwest Madison County. The National Weather Service in Huntsville has issued a tornado warning for northwestern Madison County and north central Alabama, northeastern Limestone County and north central Alabama, until 5:45 p.m. Central Daylight Time.
And even in non-weather situations, messages are brief and typically just notices about a situation.
A message from Rochester Emergency Management. Authorities are on the scene of a hazardous materials release on the highway in the vicinity of Interstate 90 and Highway 52. Stay away from the area and remain upwind to avoid possible exposure.
This is normal for the EAS. We rarely have situations where this formula is broken. Most occurrences only require this amount of information. Kinda boring, right? It's almost like it's not made to be cinematic for a stupid teenager to gush about. Because of the mundaneness of these alerts, they never scare me much anymore. Whenever summer rolls around and tornadoes start to become very prevalent, I know what to expect, and if anything, these broadcasts are just interruptions to the meteorologists providing much more immediate and accurate information. My average tornado warning, though, holds not even a candle to the disaster we are about to talk about today. A disaster that required the National Weather Service to throw this formula straight out the window and replace it with the most chilling message they've ever sent out to the public. When Hurricane Katrina was moving inward towards New Orleans, it was a Category 5 hurricane. While it did slightly weaken to a Category 4 before making landfall, the effects were just as devastating to the fragile structure of the coastal city. In anticipation, residents were issued a mandatory evacuation. Those who could evacuate were advised to do so, as the storm had a good chance of practically sinking the city. However, some chose not to, or couldn't at all. To enforce urgency in the residents of coastal Louisiana, the National Weather Service issued what they called an Inland Hurricane Wind Warning. This bulletin was released on August 28, 2005 at 10:11 a.m., one day before Katrina struck the area. What you are about to see was posted by the EAS Experience on YouTube in 2009, and to my knowledge is likely a recreation. However, this alert's existence in this format, as well as the message itself, is 100% real, as many survivors of the disaster will account. I've shown you what a normal emergency broadcast looks like. Now I will show you this one, and the differences certainly won't be hard to spot.
Devastating damage expected. Hurricane Katrina, a most powerful hurricane with unprecedented strength, rivaling the intensity of Hurricane Camille of 1969. Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks, perhaps longer. At least one half of well-constructed homes will have roof and wall failure. All gabled roofs will fail, leaving those homes severely damaged or destroyed.
No message begins in such a direct, blunt manner. Usually a warning is led by a signature from the National Weather Service, naming the warning and the areas affected. However, this one does none of that. The purpose of this warning, ironically, isn't to warn you anymore.
The majority of industrial buildings will become non-functional. Partial to complete wall and roof failure is expected. All wood-framed low-rising apartment buildings will be destroyed. Concrete blocked low-rise apartments will sustain major damage, including some wall and roof failure. High-rise office and apartment buildings will sway dangerously, a few to the point of total collapse. All windows will blow out. Airborne debris will be widespread, and may include heavy items such as household appliances, and even light vehicles. Sport utility vehicles and light trucks will be moved. The blown debris will create additional destruction. Persons, pets, and livestock exposed to the winds will face certain death if struck.
This message lists nothing but the devastation that is guaranteed upon the arrival of this monster. There is no likely outcome. Devastation is confirmed, and lives are in danger. Everyone in this area has already heard of this hurricane. They have already been warned. Evacuation is the only way to guarantee survival, but no matter how mandatory an evacuation is ordered, you can't force anyone to do anything. Nonetheless, to ensure ignorance isn't an obstacle, the risk is described in harsh detail.
Power outages will last for weeks, as most power poles will be down and transformers destroyed. Water shortages will make human suffering incredible by modern standards. The vast majority of native trees will be snapped or uprooted. Only the hardiest will remain standing, but be totally defoliated. Few crops will remain. Livestock left exposed to the winds will be killed.
The harshest words ever uttered in a real EAS broadcast are stated in these sentences. No such language would ever be expected by such a linear, sophisticated system. But it gets its message across. There are no precautions or shelters. If you do not leave, this is what you will go through.
An inland hurricane wind warning is issued when sustained winds near hurricane force, or frequent gusts at or above hurricane force, are certain within the next 12 to 24 hours. Once tropical storm and hurricane force winds onset, do not venture outside.
The ending of this message confirms its target audience, those who have chosen not to evacuate despite the horrific and certain consequences. Its only advice to those who decided to remain in the area is to not go outside once the storm inevitably arrives. It's vague. At a time where it's most important to provide as detailed instruction as possible, its only instruction is minimal and vague. When looking at it this way, you may ask yourself, sure, it's chilling, it's alarming and horrifying to hear, but with its vagueness and its instruction, was it truly effective? When faced with a direct list of devastating impacts the city of New Orleans was about to fall victim to, many people who didn't initially plan to evacuate had a much clearer perspective of the danger coming with such a decision, and thus a way stronger motivation to evacuate. The NWS themselves state their main priority in releasing this message. An official overview PDF of the entire event marks this bulletin as a significant moment for the organization as the storm was approaching, along with elaborating how the message effectively encouraged listeners to evacuate and avoid these incoming harsh conditions at any cost. Robert Ricks, a meteorologist working with the NWS at the time, had been through 2 other major hurricanes before Katrina came around. Ricks was certainly experienced with such events, and his experience shows with his wording of this broadcast. Yes, it was harsh, likely panic-inducing for some, and incredibly ominous in hindsight, but such a treacherous event calls for such an alarming call-out, and lives were saved because of it. It is incredibly sad to me that not every life could have been saved from this hurricane. Many who didn't make it were completely unable to evacuate at all. My heart goes out to anyone still affected today by this horrific event. As I wrap up this video, I want to point out some very interesting details I noticed while researching that couldn't quite fit in the actual script. If I hadn't told you this was real prior to showing this broadcast to you, or maybe even though I did, you might have believed it was completely fake. Well, you wouldn't at all be alone in thinking that, as apparently a lot of news outlets consider it so off the rails and graphic that they labeled it as a complete hoax and had to actually ask the NWS for clarification that they truly made it. Additionally, circling back to the incredible issuer Robert Ricks, this bulletin is actually in a museum, the National Museum of American History, along with Rick's rosary that he was holding onto while surviving the storm. Alright, enough research. Thanks for making it this far. This video is far different from anything else I have ever written, but I was brought to tears when I first watched this broadcast and figured it was definitely worth talking about, especially if any of you are coming from the EAS video I kicked this channel off with. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider leaving a like. It helps more than you think, as does commenting and subscribing if you truly think I earned it. But it's your call at the end of the day. Once again, thank you for making it this far, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, my friends.